She collapsed between the flags. Right there, between Finland and Ghana. Her body hit the floor before the speech ended, and no one moved, not even the guards. I remember her shoe twisted sideways, the mirror in the heel cracked. Her bag still open. No one touched it. 45 seconds later, the hall resumed. Delegates nodded. Translations resumed. And the janitor rolled her away like she'd spilled coffee. That was my third week inside the UN. They said this assignment would be quiet, cultural, symbolic. But there I was, watching a dead woman disappear under applause, holding a note in my pocket I hadn't dared read. That was the moment I realized this wasn't diplomacy. This was war. If you're still romantic about peacekeeping, subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. You'll want to sit for this one. I arrived with a fake briefcase and a passport I wasn't supposed to show more than once. It said Cultural Affairs Liaison, but even I didn't know what culture I was supposed to represent. The only instruction was to keep my head down. The UN building, glass, steel, neat as a museum, looked more like a theater set than an institution. Too clean, too symmetrical. Too many cameras pointing nowhere useful. My office shared a wall with someone from the Soviet bloc. Left of me, a faded plaque in Cyrillic. Right of me, a Brit who claimed to work for no one and never touched paper. I was assigned a Lebanese assistant who never made eye contact. It was the kind of mission that starts with no clear objective until a conversation cuts off just as you walk by. In the first week, I sat through 6 committees and didn't say a word. I watched. That was the job. Most speeches were read in a flat tone, like everyone knew no one was really listening. But a few delegates layered their words, pauses where they didn't belong, phrases that weren't in the transcript, as if they were speaking in codes only the right ears could hear. One morning, riding the delegates' elevator, a man from Senegal patted me on the shoulder. Never met him before. He smiled, asked if I was new, and before I could answer, he said, "Walls don't listen here. The chairs do." I didn't know if it was a joke or a warning. The next day, his seat at the security committee was empty. No explanation, no name tag. Langley had given me a wrist recorder. I wasn't supposed to activate it unless someone said something nuclear, something oil-related, or something that hinted at sabotage. But none of that came up. What I did start noticing were silences, perfectly timed ones, interrupted sentences, language switches mid-paragraph, words repeated just enough to feel staged, like someone was feeding patterns into a machine. The strangest session came on a Thursday. I was seated in the back row of the decolonization committee, standard pageantry, until a woman from Sierra Leone walked in. She wasn't on the schedule. She didn't wear any flag pin, just a blue dress and a face that looked too calm. She passed by me without looking and dropped a folded note on the folder resting on my lap. No contact, no glance. Just a note inside. Nothing but a coordinate and a number. That night, I called Langley from the encrypted line at the embassy. Took 10 minutes for someone to answer. They ran it through maps, codebooks, internal directories. Nothing. The coordinate pointed to the UN building itself. The number 0034 meant nothing. Invisible ink? They asked. No, I said. Just intent. What bothered me wasn't that they didn't find anything. It was that they hung up without asking for a copy of the note. After that, I started arriving an hour early to every session. Not out of duty, out of something closer to paranoia. Because if someone knew more than we did, they weren't in Moscow or Washington. They were inside, in these blue carpeted halls, saying unnecessary words into microphones that recorded empty speeches for audiences that no longer existed. And that number 034, it kept showing up on folders, on schedules. on envelopes people left behind. But the first time I heard someone say it out loud was from a mouth that should have never spoken Spanish. I started watching the seats, not the speakers, not the flags, just the chairs. Especially in Committee 4. That's what they called the Special Political and Decolonization Committee. But no one ever called it by name inside the building. Just 4. Like it was cursed. It was always full. Until at WASN single quotes D. The odd part wasn't the absences. It was the pattern. Certain chairs, always the same ones, would be empty during votes that didn't matter. Then, suddenly, occupied during sessions that were supposedly procedural. And the people who sat in them? Not the usual diplomats. No placards, no folders, just sit, listen, leave. I started sketching their positions in my notebook. I thought I was being paranoid. Until a colleague from West Germany leaned over during one session and whispered, "Count the ones who take no notes. Those are the ones worth watching." And she never came back. That was the first time I saw her. The woman from Sierra Leone. Same blue dress, same distant stare. She sat 3 rows ahead, didn't look around, didn't shift in her seat. At one point, she leaned down to adjust her bag, and when she came back up, there was a folded note on the floor next to my shoe. No one saw her drop it. I waited until the end of the session to pick it up, walked out calmly, took the elevator to sublevel 2, where no one ever checked badges. I opened it under the emergency stairwell, behind a steel door that always stuck halfway. Blank. At first glance, just a scrap of recycled UN stationery. But when I held it under the exit light, I saw the faint imprint, same as before. 0034, same number. But this time, beneath it, a hand-drawn square. And inside the square, a tiny cross, like a window. Or a grid. I faxed it directly to Langley that night. Coded as low priority just to see who read it. 48 hours later, the response wasn't a reply. It was a transfer request form, unsigned, placed on my desk between the meeting schedule and a coffee voucher. They wanted me out. I declined. Instead, I started pulling floor plans. The UN building is supposed to be one of the most documented structures in New York, but there were discrepancies. A few measurements that didn't add up. A hallway on level 7 that had no entry point. A fire exit listed on paper, but not in person. And then, on a stormy Tuesday afternoon, someone left their briefcase under one of the seats. No flag. No ID. No one claimed it. It was black leather, weathered, and when I nudged it with my foot, it felt too light. I waited until the room cleared. Took it. Inside. Nothing but a cassette. No label. Just 0034. Handwritten with a shaky marker. I didn't play it. Not yet. I kept it sealed in a diplomatic pouch, logged it as a personal item, and stored it in the embassy safe. That night, I saw her again. She stood outside the UN entrance. Arms crossed, no umbrella despite the rain. She looked at me this time, just once, and then she mouthed something I didn't catch except for the final word. Library. She turned and walked into the store. And that's when I realized Committee 4 wasn't about votes. It was about messages that didn't need to be spoken. She always sat second from the left. Headset on, eyes down. The interpreters had their own booth glass box, soundproofed, elevated just enough to see everyone, but rarely seen themselves. Most days I barely noticed them. They spoke in whispers, repeated what others said, and never reacted to anything. That was the job. But on that Thursday afternoon, she made a mistake. Or at least, that's what it was supposed to look like. The delegate from Uruguay was giving a bland speech textbook support for a resolution about resource sovereignty. Nothing new. Nothing dangerous. But when his words reached the English Channel, something shifted. The interpreter, this woman, mid-30s, Soviet accent buried under years of training, added a phrase that wasn't there. Double quotes, ... and we acknowledged the unspoken influence of American private interests. The room didn't flinch. Most weren't even listening. But I was. I had the original speech in my folder. That sentence wasn't on it, not even close. I checked again, scanned the printed copy, then looked at her. She wasn't even blinking, just repeating each phrase like a machine. I wrote it down, highlighted it, and brought it up casually during a check-in with my Langley handler. He brushed it off. Said, "Interpreters adjust tone all the time. Could be a dialect thing," he added. I asked if we had anyone reviewing the live feeds from the interpretation booths. "No," he said. "Too much noise. Not our lane." That should have been the end of it. But the next day, a delegate from Ghana quoted that exact phrase in English, word for word, as if it had always been part of the Uruguayan speech. Someone was feeding it back into the system. That's when I started tracking her. She arrived early, always alone, never ate in the cafeteria, wore the same gray sweater with a thin gold chain that rested right on the line of her collarbone. Every few days, her bag changed, but it always carried two pens, one red, one white. The red one she never used. I followed her out once, all the way to 47th Street. She entered a side door of a bookstore that was never open. 5 minutes later, she came out with nothing in her hands. I went in. There was no one behind the counter. No books for sale. Just a row of tightly packed shelves. And a table with a chessboard, mid-game. No chairs. I stepped out. She was gone. Back inside the UN, I managed to gain access to one of the interpreter rest areas. Nothing strange until I opened a locker labeled Rizova. Empty, except for a folded page, a transcript, marked with edits in red. The same phrase again. ... The unspoken influence of American private interests. Next to it, a handwritten note. Say it enough times, and it becomes real. She didn't show up for work the next day. The booth stayed empty. And when I asked the floor manager where she was assigned, he looked at me and said, "There's no Rizova on our staff." Never has been. But I had the red pen. And the tape. Something told me she wasn't done speaking yet. The elevators in the UN building are polite. They ding once, slide open, wait exactly 4 seconds, then close. Except for one back left near the loading dock. That one doesn't ding. And if you press the 7th floor, it pauses. Like it's thinking, that's where he found me. Morales. Ex-security. Linked on one leg, still wore the badge even though he'd retired 6 years prior. Said he liked the cafeteria's rice pudding. He knew I wasn't really cultural affairs. And I didn't pretend otherwise. Want to see something they never talk about? He asked. We rode up in silence. When the doors opened, the lights were off. This wing wasn't on any floor plan I'd pulled. No signs, no ventilation hum. Just a corridor with green carpet, walls slightly curved, like the building wasn't finished here. He pulled out a rusted key, opened a door marked Storage 3C. Inside, dust, crates, a collapsed mural leaning sideways against the wall, and behind it a hole, not a passage. Just a square opening, like someone had ripped out a wall panel and found a cavity they weren't supposed to. Morales handed me a flashlight. We crawled in. It wasn't wide, maybe 2 meters deep, but it had been used. A chair bolted to the floor, foam peeling, a steel shelf, an old reel-to-reel recorder with Soviet markings, wires coiled along the corner like veins. There were tapes, dozens, numbered, unlabeled. We played one, white noise, then static, Then my voice, not just a recording of me. A perfect replica of something I'd never said. I was speaking in Russian. I don't speak Russian. I looked at Morales. He didn't look surprised. They called this room the practice booth. He said, but no one ever practiced here. He lit a cigarette, blew smoke into the dark. There's things in this building no badge can access. But some voices get in anyway. I took the tape. He let me dot the next day. Morales was gone. I checked the guards' roster. No one named Morales. No retirement records. No cafeteria logs. Nothing. But the hole in the wall was sealed. Fresh paint. Still tacky to the touch. And someone had moved the mural back into place. Except now it was facing the wrong direction. The chair was gone. The shelf too. Only the recorder remained, and inside it, a new tape dot labeled 034 dot. The tape played differently. This time dot slower. Dragged like the magnetic strip had been stretched or baked. I had to use a modified player from the embassy's old AV room just to hear it properly. No voices at first, just rhythmic tones, like someone running a coded sequence through analog audio. Then faintly, in between the bleeps, a fragment of English. Protocol dot, dot elution dot dot phase 3 dot dot. Consensus required dot dot dot. It didn't sound like a military code. It sounded dot 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 administrative dot. I flagged it for Langley, used a mid-priority courier pouch, no encryption. I wanted to see who intercepted it. Within 36 hours, I got an answer, not from my usual handler, but from a systems analyst I'd never heard of. He didn't greet me, just said, "You don't know what you're sitting on." He explained that elution protocol had surfaced before in fragments, buried in draft memos from non-aligned nations. Countries that were supposedly neutral: Indonesia, Egypt, Yugoslavia, Ghana. Each reference had different phrasing, but the structure, the grammar was identical. That's when he said it. This isn't a document. It's a blueprint. According to him, the protocol embedded instructions across multiple languages. Not in content, but in structure. Verb patterns, passive constructions, unusual sequence of pronouns, things it wouldn't raise flags to ordinary analysts. But when arranged in sequence, they formed commands. He called it linguistic STEGANOGRAPHY. The message wasn't what was said. It was how it was said. I asked what kind of instructions it encoded. He said, sabotage, diplomatic, slow. The objective wasn't to disrupt peace talks. It was to shift narrative frames, poison credibility, reassign moral authority, all within the official language of cooperation. It's not espionage, he said. It's narrative warfare. I asked how long it had been running. He paused. Possibly since 71, maybe longer. Then he told me something I didn't expect. The earliest copy of the elution protocol came from within the UN. I asked him where it was discovered. Burkina Faso's delegation, he said, in a document titled Logistics for Peacekeeping Rotation. I sat with that for a while. The idea that the peacekeepers were circulating sabotage orders, hidden, inside scheduling memos and staff rotation briefs. And no one had noticed because the language was polite. By now, I'd started pulling all diplomatic communiques marked neutral. There, it was again, same structural patterns. Slight shifts. Tiny linguistic fingerprints repeated like a ghost. Script across different countries. One phrase returned often, subject to coordinated discretion. Meaningless on the surface, but it always preceded some operational delay. A vote postponed. A committee adjourned early. A negotiation dropped mid-track. And then it hit me. 034 wasn't a person or a room. It was a command, a trigger line, a phrase, buried inside bureaucratic language that, when repeated through enough channels, enacted coordinated obstruction, and I had said it. In one of my own reports. It was in my file. Filed under routine summary, cultural liaison debrief. Final line, subject to coordinated discretion. I stopped assuming anyone was neutral. The non-aligned movement had always been treated like background noise idealists with slogans. Neither east nor west. But after what I'd seen in the transcripts, I started reading their silence differently. The way they deferred. The way they arrived late, left early, voted present instead of yes or no. There was intention behind every shrug. One of them, let's call him, Armin, was from a country no one pronounced correctly, and everyone underestimated. We shared smoke breaks, nothing official. He laughed too loud, told bad jokes about translators. But there was something about the way he watched the room when no one was watching him. One evening, I found him on the balcony overlooking the East River. No coat. Just his ID badge swinging in the wind. I lit a cigarette. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he asked, "Do you believe in silence?" I said, "I believe in what it covers." He nodded. Then, without looking at me, said, "Everyone plays. No one confesses. You speak, you disappear." I asked him if he'd ever heard of Aleutian protocol. He dropped his cigarette. "That's not a protocol," he said. "That's a filter." "What? Does it filter?" He smiled. "Loyalty. Misplaced ones." He walked off. That night, I came back to my office and found my chair tilted, slightly. No one else had a key. My drawers were untouched. My folders in place. But the tape 0034 was gone from the safe. In its place was a note, handwritten. "You already used it." That was when I realized it wasn't about the tape. It was about me. I pulled every dispatch I'd sent since I arrived. Cross-referenced. The language. There it was, those same phrases. Word for word. Phrases I didn't remember writing. Sentences I would have never used. Someone had rewritten my reports. Or worse, someone had spoken through me. The next morning, Armin avoided me. No nod. No glance. I checked his delegation's table in Committee 4. Empty. 2 days later, a newswire reported his diplomatic status had been revoked. No reason given. I tried contacting his country's mission. No record of him. No employment file. No visa. Like he'd never existed. That night, I heard a click outside my apartment door. No knock. No footsteps. Just a click. When I opened it, the hallway was empty. But someone had slid a slip of paper under the door. A single question. If everyone listens, who are you talking to? The library was supposed to close at 6 p.m. But one night, around 7:40, I saw a man in a Yugoslav suit, thin pinstripes, double-breasted, too stiff for walking, enter through the service elevator with a key I'd never seen before. He didn't carry books. He carried nothing. I followed at a distance, past the security desk, down a corridor lined with display cases of old treaties no one had read in decades. He moved without hesitation. No badge check. No hesitation at the locked door. Just turned the key and slipped inside. I waited a full minute, then followed. The lights were off. A single desk lamp glowed in the far corner, flickering. Not a sound. I moved slow. I knew how to walk without echo. What I didn't expect was what I saw behind the card catalog wall. 3 men seated, no books, no papers, just envelopes. Identical beige folders, each one marked with a library code. That didn't exist in the official registry. They weren't reading. They were exchanging. One by one. They slid envelopes into the old wooden checkout slots, those designed for punch cards and date stamps. Each motion deliberate. Each interaction. Silent. Microfiche. Inside those envelopes were microfiche slides. No one uses microfiche anymore. Not unless you want something that can't be scanned, can't be emailed, can't be stored on any system someone might search. Physical, fragile, perfect. I stepped back, quiet, didn't breathe. As I turned to leave, I saw one more detail. List. Taped to the inside of the reference desk. Handwritten, a ledger of names. But none of them were real. Fake identities, delegates who didn't exist, assigned to committees that had been disbanded years prior. And next to each name, an expiration date. Not a birth date, not a visa date. Just expiration. I left the library without being seen. Or so I thought. The next morning, the head librarian, a woman I'd never spoken to, handed me a book. Smiled like we were old friends. Found your request, she said. Hadn't made one. The book was hollow. Inside, a strip of microfiche. No markings, and a card. Typed, "You've been granted temporary clearance. Use it wisely." No signature. No seal. No explanation. That was when I understood the library's real function. It wasn't to preserve knowledge. It was to distribute memory. To those who knew what to look for and had the right kind of silence. She sat in the third row, far right, delegate of Finland. Or that's what the placard said. Mid-40s, elegant, always alone. Her routine never changed. Arrive 10 minutes early. Review, no papers. Sip something from a thermos labeled water, then lean back in her chair and pretend to doze off. The moment the session began, no one questioned it. Delegates slept all the time. Half the General Assembly could pass for a retirement home on slow days. But I noticed something wrong. Her bag never touched the ground. It always stayed angled, just enough to keep the flap open. Inside was a small mesh screen, positioned precisely, with a microphone stem on her desk. Would point. She wasn't sleeping. She was recording. And then there was her shoe. One heel and a rotating mirror. Like a child's toy or something from an old spy novel. When she crossed her legs, the mirror pointed left. When she shifted, it pointed right. She was scanning reactions, facial cues, micro expressions. Not for herself, for someone else. I checked. Our records. Finland didn't have clearance for counterintelligence operations inside UN grounds. So I pulled embassy logs, courier manifests. Nothing. She didn't exist. Or at least her version didn't. I left a note on her desk during a break. Just 4 words. Who are you transmitting to? She didn't react. But the next session, her thermos had changed. New label. It said, "Not you." I laughed. Couldn't help it. That kind of boldness only comes from people who know no one can touch them. Later that week, during a heated exchange between the Soviet and Turkish delegates, she fell asleep again. But her eyes weren't closed, just lowered. And every few seconds, she tapped her pen twice, pause once, pause, repeat. I recognized the pattern. 3-letter code rhythm. She wasn't Finnish. She wasn't Sia. She wasn't even pretending to represent a nation anymore. She was collecting something else. On the last day I saw her, she left behind her mirror shoe. Inside the heel cavity, a tightly folded slip of paper. It read, "Trust the ones who seem bored. They're paying the most attention." And below that, 0034 is not a number. It's a window. Don't open it alone. He spoke like a ghost trained in public relations. Perfect rhythm, 0 inflection, no regional quirks. You know how most interpreters breathe between lines? He didn't. His delivery was seamless like playback. Not human. The first time I heard him, I looked up expecting to see a machine running back up. Instead, I saw a man tall, pale, stiff as a mannequin. No notes, no water bottle, no wasted motion. Just lips moving in perfect sync. They said he was Russian. But when I asked around, no one knew his real name. Just the new guy from Geneva. Problem is, Geneva doesn't assign interpreters directly to UN plenary sessions. They loan them through channels. And this one had no record, but I knew that voice. I'd heard it before. Berlin, 1968, AKGB Intercept Shortwave Channel. Different context back then. The voice issued execution orders during a failed extraction near Treptower Park. Back then, I was sure it was synthetic. Now it was standing 10 feet from me. I tested it. I passed a note to one of the Spanish delegates, asking him to insert an off-script phrase mid-speech. La ventana se cerró sola. The window closed. By itself. When the delegate read it, the interpreter paused. For a full 2 seconds. Then translated it not as window, but as sequence 34 has completed. Sequence 34. That's when I realized it wasn't just a code. It was a cue, something embedded in his programming. Because yes, by then I was convinced he wasn't normal. Human? Maybe, but trained beyond human. Vocal alignment, semantic compression, eye movement suppression. Soviet research had been experimenting with phonetic impersonation since the late 50s. He wasn't interpreting. He was infiltrating speech itself. The next day, I followed him to the transit corridor between the Secretariat and Conference Building. No one else around. I waited behind a pillar. He stopped without turning and said, "You're not authorized to listen beyond meaning." I stepped out. "Who trained you?" I asked. He didn't smile. Didn't blink. Just replied, "The same ones who trained you to forget." He turned, walked through a security door that shouldn't have opened for him, and vanished. I ran the footage later. Security logs showed no one in the hallway. No interpreter. No entry. Just me. Talking to no one. But the microphone on my lapel? It picked up his voice. Perfectly. It was just after 3 a.m. when the knock came. Not loud, not repeated, just one knock. Enough to wake me barefoot, half-dressed, Beretta still under the knitstand. When I opened the door, 2 men stood there. Black suits, no expressions, embassy credentials clipped too perfectly. One I recognized, the other. "Not at all. Double quotes, Mr. Connors," the taller one said. "You've been reassigned. Immediate effect." They handed me a sealed envelope. My name, my clearance level, but signed by someone who hadn't been active since Saigon. I asked where I was going. They didn't answer. Just handed me a plane ticket. Geneva. No return. No explanations. No requests for debrief. Just a polite expulsion. Like I was being airlifted. Out of a dinner party I hadn't ruined, but had seen too much of. I said I wanted to speak to Langley directly. "You already have," the shorter one said. They concur. He said it like it was a diagnosis. I stalled, said I needed to pack. They watched me do it. One of them checked the bathroom. The other stood by my desk, looked at the wall where I'd pinned timelines, seating charts, microfiche, identifiers. He didn't touch anything, just said, "This isn't your puzzle anymore." That's when I knew. It wasn't about protecting me. It was about sealing the archive. I wasn't being transferred. I was being disconnected. Not eliminated, no. That would draw attention. But they wanted me far enough, quiet enough, that no one would ever follow up on what I'd seen. No hearings. No reports. No footnotes. Just a sudden silence. Before we left, I asked one last question. Was there ever a real protocol? 0034? The taller one tilted his head. There was, briefly, until you named it. Then he smiled. That kind of smile only people with lifetime clearance are trained to make. Not gloating. Not cruel. Just finished. We reached the car before getting in. I looked back at the UN building. All those flags, still, unmoving in the night. Then I noticed mine wasn't there. No US flag. I asked them about it. They said, It was never raised. It was slipped under my hotel door. Gong knock. No courier. Just there, when I came back from the embassy pharmacy, tucked beneath the Do Not Disturb sign like an afterthought. White envelope, UN letterhead. No stamp. No seal. My name handwritten. In tight, deliberate cursive. Inside, one sheet. No date. No signature. Just a single line typed on an old Olympia machine. What is the true purpose of an international organization if all its members are spying? No threat, no demand. Just that dot a question. But the weight of it stopped me cold. I checked the paper. Genuine stock. Official issue. A trace of fingerprint powder on the corner. Someone else had touched it. Maybe even someone in the same building. I'd left behind. I brought the letter to the embassy. They took it into evidence, promised a full trace. I never saw it again. 2 days later, my clearance badge stopped working. Then my housing assignment changed. Then my salary was under review. By the end of the week, I wasn't reassigned. I was vanished on paper. Nothing hostile, nothing loud. Just layers of silence folding in on themselves. I asked one of the embassy techs if he'd seen anything strange on the access logs that week. Just looked at me and said, "How do you define strange if the system redefines normal?" That night, I sat in the bathtub with the tap running and played the last microfiche I had left converted manually. Frame by frame. It showed minutes from a meeting that never happened. 10 delegates. No flags, no transcripts. Each line of dialogue was a question, never an answer. Each question ended with a number, 34, and one of the voices, though distorted, was mine. Not similar. Mine. Saying things I never remembered saying. And in one frame blurry, low contrast, was a hand placing a letter on a desk. Same envelope. Same handwriting. Same single sentence. Only this time, at the bottom, scrawled in black ink. You still think you're the one watching? It took me 16 years to walk back through those doors. Tourist entrance. No badge, no clearance. Just me and a laminated visitor pass that kept curling at the corners. The guard didn't even look at my name. Just scanned the barcode and waved me in. The lobby was exactly the same, cleaner, maybe newer furniture. A few digital kiosks now, but the air still smelled like filtered tension. The kind you don't notice until you've been gone long enough to forget how much of it you used to carry in your lungs. I walked past the gift shop, past the security rotunda, straight to the front plaza where the flags stood in their assigned order. Except something was off. One pole had no flag. Not lowered. Not replaced. Just empty, like someone had erased a country. I stood there for almost 15 minutes. No one else seemed to notice or care. The guides went on talking. The school kids kept taking pictures. But that pole, it stayed. Bare. And then I started seeing them faces, not clearly. Just flashes. A woman with a mirror in her shoe. A man who never blinked. A hand placing a cassette on a table no one ever admitted existed. I didn't move. I didn't take a picture. I just stood there, remembering every silence, every note passed, every delegate who was never listed. And I understood, finally, what we'd really been doing all those years. It wasn't diplomacy. It wasn't theater. It was war. Without uniforms. Without bullets. Without history books. Just a long, slow erasure played out under the illusion of peace. And no one, not then, not now, dares to call it what it was. If you're still watching and still believe in official stories, hit that subscribe button.